Hey everybody, so a lot of you have questions about how to set attributes of an object. Do you use a message? Do you use a pack? Do you use an attrui? Do you type them in? And the answer is yes to all. You could use all of those methods to change the attributes of an object. You just want to decide on the best method for what you're trying to accomplish. So here, if I want to tint this image, I can certainly type in the color attribute, and we'll just make it all orange. So 100% red, 50% green, no blue, full transparency. That's going to tint it orange. And that's very useful if you want this video always to be tinted orange and you don't want to have to send it a message every time you open up the patch. This typed in argument will set this color as soon as the patch is loaded. But that's not very flexible. So then certainly you can add an attrui to it and select the color attribute. And as we typically do, you want to go to your inspector for that attrui and set the display mode to multi-number float. And now, the nice thing about an attrui is that it's one of those rare cases where we have two-way communication on a patch cable. This is going to send changes of the attribute to the jit.gl.layer, but it also receives the current state of the attributes from the layer. And since we have a typed in attribute here, this GL color attrui is telling us the current state. But now we have interactive control where we can dial in new values. And it does unfortunately let us go into illegal values. Negative 33 red doesn't really mean anything, and values greater than 1 are going to blow out the image. So really you want to confine yourself to a range of 0 to 1 here in color. So if we want to control it externally, we can send values into the attrui. And here, since we have 4 values, we're going to need to send it a 4-value list. And we can use an object like pack to do that. So here I'm going to set the red, green, and blue value and leave the transparency set to 1. So this button will set my color to red. This button will set my color back to orange. And this button will set my color to a pale blue tint. Red, orange, pale blue tint. Let's make that tint a little bit more present. And back to normal. There's normal, there's the blue tint, orange, red. Good. And this here we're using that feature of pack, that kind of helper aspect of pack, that if you send it a 3-element list in its left inlet, that list will populate the first 3 spots in the output list, and it'll leave the 1 alone. And also, we have individual dynamic control of the elements from number boxes. And this is sort of what we've seen most commonly. And all of these things work and function at the same time. So here we have control, here we have control, here we have control. And any change that we make is going to be reflected in the attrui. So it's a little confusing potentially that we can control it from all of these different places, but it's also extremely useful that we can. So if you don't need all of this complexity, if you don't need all of this visual feedback, you can always just use a message box with the attribute name in it. And send it right into the object. That's going to color it. Fourth value for transparency. And that's going to color it purple. And our attrui reflects that change. And then we can go back to these controls and make other changes, set the color from the message or from the attrui. We can also combine these two ideas. Like this. Now I'm using a pack, but I'm formatting a list that begins with the word color rather than going to the attrui. And this is really one of your most compact forms of doing all of this, because it can accept all of the same information, except this time it's going to accept it into the second inlet. Why? Because the first inlet is for the first element in the list, and the first element in the list is the word color. So if we send anything other than color into this left inlet, it will replace that word color, which we don't want. And so we have those separate controls, and we also have the individual controls. Red, green, blue, and if we want, we can connect another one for alpha. And again, all of these are working simultaneously to control the attributes of the object. And the one I haven't shown you yet is the one that I use the most personally. And that is $ arguments in a message box, because it simplifies, it reduces your number of objects on the screen the most. We can say color $1, $2, $3, 1. What does this $ nonsense mean? It's exactly the same as this usage of the pack object. It evaluates the incoming list, and it puts the first thing in the list in the position of $1, the second thing in the list in the position of $2, the third thing in the list in the position of $3. So this will do exactly the same thing as it will here and as it will here. But you can see this is just a more streamlined method. And it does give you the added benefit of being able to rearrange the items. So in this case, it's going to take the second element of the list and put it first, take the first element of the incoming list and put it second. So in this case, this is not going to be red, this is going to be green. And that's it's kind of a silly example in this case, but it's useful in a lot of situations. It's particularly useful with scale, because if we do scale, $1, $1, but then we only need to send a single number in here to scale this. So if we view what's happening here, we see that it's giving us proportional scaling. So I love the $ arguments. Some people find them more confusing. I'm not sure why. To me, they're the simplest, actually. But I don't teach them right away because about 50% of students really don't like or relate to the $ arguments. You don't have to use them. And I guess that's kind of what this video is about, is all of these methods do some shade of the same thing with different levels of control, visual feedback, and interactivity. And the final thing I want to show is yet another way to set attributes. You can set an attribute of every instance of a particular object. So let's say I have a bunch of movie players, and you want to turn the sound down on all of them simultaneously. There's an object called universal, and you send it a message that begins with the word send, then the name of the object that you're addressing, jit.playlist. And then the attribute name and the value. So send jit.playlist vol 0. It's going to send every jit.playlist in the patch the message volume 0. And you can see they're all set to 0. And of course you can use this to set any value that you want. Set them all to half volume. And we see every instance of the jit.playlist is set to half volume. And now here, just to show you how handy this $1 argument is, right? I didn't need to make a pack. I didn't need to make an attrui. I didn't need to do anything. This $1 will just be replaced by the incoming value. It's taking the first element in the incoming list, and there is only one element. It's not a list at all. So it's taking the thing that's coming in, and it simply replaces that $1 with it. So now I have interactive control over all the volumes of every jit.playlist in my patch just by sending to this universal object. And speaking of sending, setting attributes by send and receive is also valid. It won't work with an attrui. You can't send an attrui through a send, but you could certainly send this scale message. I could say send scale all. You know, presumably I'm going to have more layers here. And I can do a receive scale all. And scale all my layers together. So it's scaling this layer and these 3 layers. Now you say, what's the difference between that and universal? With send and receive, I can leave one layer out. I can leave this layer here unscaled. But with universal, it is truly universal. It sends it to every jit.playlist object, and there's no way to exclude one. But with send and receive, I'm able to exclude this layer, which I just made yellow. So all the other layers will scale. And the yellow layer will remain unscaled. And we can't see these other layers right now because we need to move them. And throw this one behind the others as a background. So now we can say I'm getting all of these layers changing dynamically in scale with my one background layer independent of them. So I hope that's useful and clarifies some things.